we have been observing this the anniversary of the port under the inspiring leadership of our chairman. And in fact, last year too, we have had with us very distinguished personnel scholars like Dr. Shankar Sen, formerly Vice Chancellor, Jadavpur University, and Minister in Charge, Power and Science Technology, Government of West Bengal, as well as Professor Dr. Satyesh Chakraborty, formerly Professor of Indian Institute of Management, Kolkata, and Director, Indian Institute of Port Management. As they say, God must have been a ship owner, and that's how the cradle of great civilizations were separated by vast expanse of the seas and the oceans for the purpose of maritime development. And that's why the ports came subsequently to meet the requirement of the maritime development. May I now invite our, may I now request to felicitate the dignitaries on the dais. The bouquets will be presented by the elegant ladies of the port. May I now call upon Srimati Rebecca Dash to present the bouquet to Dr. Ashok Mitra. Srimati Shubarna Thakur to Professor Varun Dey. Srimati Kaveri Chatterjee to Dr. A.K. Chadha. Srimati Mitali Ghosh to Sri M.L. Meena. Srimati Jaya Sheth to Sri M.A. Bhaskar. May I now request our Deputy Chairman Haldia Dock Complex, Sri M.L. Meena, kindly to deliver his welcome address.
Good morning. We have all gathered here to celebrate 135th anniversary of Calcutta Port. During the last 135 years, as you all know, that our port has contributed greatly to the growth of the economy of this nation, particularly our hinterland. On this occasion, it's my great honor to welcome Professor Dr. Varun Dey, formerly Director of Center for Studies in Social Sciences and Professor of Social and Economic History, IIM Calcutta, who has kindly consented to deliver the Calcutta Port Trust Anniversary Lecture this year. It's also my honor to welcome Dr. Ashok Mitra, formerly Minister of Finance and Planning, Government of West Bengal, and Professor of Economics, Indian Institute of Management, Calcutta, and Indian Statistical Institute, who will be delivering the keynote address today. I also welcome our chairman, Dr. Chanda, my colleague, Mr. Bhaskar, Mr. Bhandari, GM, South Eastern Railway, leading industrialists, corporate captains, members of the press, and senior officials of this region for being present on this occasion. Today, we as members of the Calcutta Port can claim proudly for the second position among all major ports in the country by handling more than 46 million tons last year. Our growth, as you all know, is highest among all other ports in the country, which is around 20%, 21%. And we hope this year we would be surpassing 15 million mark. This has been possible by getting cooperation from all concerned. With all our plans, achievements and challenges, we remain committed towards improving standards in catering to the demands of maritime trade. today's event is just not the celebrating another year's achievements, but also we rededicate our commitment towards providing value-added and efficient service to our customers. With once again welcoming all the distinguished guests, we hope that in future we will continue our commitment and getting support from all concerned. Thank you.
May I now request Dr. A.K. Chanda, our esteemed chairman, kindly to address the audience.
Respected Professor Ashok Mitra, formerly Minister of Finance and Planning Department of West Bengal and Professor, Indian Institute of Management, Calcutta, Indian Statistical Institute, Calcutta, Professor Dr. Barun De, Founder Director of the Center of Studies in Social Science, and Professor, Indian Institute of Management, Calcutta, my two colleagues, Deputy Chairman, Haldia Talk Complex, Sri M.L. Meena and Sri M.A. Bhaskarachar of Kolkata Port Trust, participants from the port, from the academia, from the corporate world, and the representatives and members from the press and electronic media. It's indeed a great occasion, 135th anniversary of the port, 135 years is perhaps a speck of dust in the timeline of history, but when it comes to an individual or an organization, it is an event to celebrate. And for all these 135 years that Calcutta Port has remained in existence, it is of great deal of interest to note that it has grown in a fascinating manner, like the meandering channel of the river on which this port is situated. Like the meandering channel, it sometimes becomes too narrow to navigate, and then suddenly becomes wide with water gushing to meet the water of the seas. The history of growth of Calcutta Port has also been eventful in as much as it was #1 port of the country till the mid-50s, and thereafter it took to trajectory of relatively lower growth and started slipping down. But then it made the challenges by diversifying and reaching out to meet the sea, out southwards, and developed Haldia Dock Complex way back in 1977. And that is how it could really sustain its growth. It has seen the business fluctuating, but then has been constantly on the target, and eventually over the last few years, you know that we have reported phenomenal growth, in as much as 52% growth over what it handled over the last 132 years could be achieved in course of the last 3 years. From 30 million ton where it had plateaued, the port has reported phenomenal growth. In the last 3 years, 2 years, it reported the highest absolute growth in the entire country. And then over this span of 3 years, the 16 million ton growth over 30 million, taking the total traffic to 46.16 million tons in 2004-05. And the prosperity continues in as much as it has been reporting the highest growth in the whole country this year, both in absolute and percentage terms. The Kolkata port is unique in a sense amongst all ports in India because it is the only riverine port, and therefore when one compares Kolkata port with other ports, this distinguishing feature must be kept in mind. The seaports grow normally at the location where they are set up. Their diversification requirement in geographical terms is not a very great order. But when it comes to riverine port and a tidal port at that like the river Hooghly, and with the changing events regarding the release of water, the sharing of water between the two neighboring countries, all make the functions of the port a very complex one. And therefore, the experience or the biography of a riverine port, if it is to be documented, will always show that it survives and prospers in a dynamic environment. It has to shift with time. And such has been the history of Kolkata port. It started at Adi-Saptagram, shifted to Hooghly, to Sutanuti, to Haldia, and we are talking about Sagar and Sandheads, where our drafts are enormous. In fact, Kolkata port, contrary to common belief of being a very low drafted port, is also endowed with the highest draft of the country, 50 meters at the other head. And therefore, the strength of the Kolkata port can be fully harnessed in case we can diversify southwards. That has been the constant journey. Therefore, Kolkata port's success, to my mind, lies in the fact that it has always remained vibrant and responded with the challenges of time and technology by shifting from locations of strength to locations of even greater strength. Now, in this process, we constantly have to undertake introspection, which we do during the course of the year. Entire course of the year, always an organization which has to remain vibrant and which has to face the challenges of time must be introspective. But it also must subject itself to external inspection and scrutiny, at least on occasions, and that perhaps gives the organization itself a better understanding and appreciation, and will help it to charter the course ahead. And it is with this intention that from the last year we have introduced Kolkata Port Trust Anniversary Lecture, and which was delivered by Professor Shankar Sen, and the keynote address was delivered by Professor Chakravarti. And this year we have in our midst two extremely known academicians, scholar of repute, Professor Ashok Mitra and Professor Varun De, and I'm sure their deliberations will enrich our understanding and help us to steer the affairs of the port in the days to come. I have heard that people say that Kolkata port has a glorious past, but it is not enough to live on the past. We have to meet the challenges of the present and also chart the course for the future. They say that the past is history and the future is mystery, and the present is a gift of God. And with this gift of God, we must also try to charter our course in such a manner so that the mystery will unfold and will help us harness the immense potential that this great port of Kolkata on the river Hooghly has. And in the process, we must also remember the unique potential of a riverine port, and which only a riverine port has, and that is the inland water transport. And in the process of our shifting, we have, to my mind, sometimes been negligent of the locations where the port used to be in the yesteryears, and with our obsession on ocean shipping, because after all we have looked upon the affairs of port and shipping primarily for global trade, but have somehow remained oblivious about the requirements of internal trade and what role can port as an inland water transport port can play in such matters of trade and commerce. And there, by being oblivious, we have really made certain blunders in historical terms, and in the process we have imposed great strains on road and rail, whereas the natural course of the water could have been of great help. And therefore, whenever in a riverine port a shift takes place, I suppose it will be very important to remember that it is that while for ocean shipping, the shift has to take place perhaps southwards in this river, but the locations upstream will still continue to remain relevant for inland water trade, and therefore such locations must be maintained. Maybe the characteristics of handling will have to change to an extent, but then they still continue to be relevant as inland water transport ports are relevant in the Europe and in other countries. And by not doing it, we have possibly been responsible to an extent for the decadence of inland water transport along the upstream of Hooghly River. And today we are building jetties at Chandanagar and many destinations upstream for inland water transport or for river tourism. But then if we had remained a little more careful in our whole strategy, perhaps we wouldn't have been required to reinvent ourselves and to re-engineer the whole process which we had always with us. And therefore, in our charter for the future, while there will be a great deal of thrust of harnessing the potential of the deep drafted location, the potential of the existing locations, and the locations which we have neglected in the past must also be borne in mind, and I'm sure that will give and help us realize the enormous potential of our port. With this, I have great pleasure in welcoming you all and in welcoming two great scholars in our midst, Professor Bolunde and Professor Ashok Mitra. Thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman and friends, this is celebration time for the Calcutta Port Trust. It has been doing, as the chairman has been describing, exceedingly well during the last few years. And even a congenital pessimist like me felt overwhelmed by the kind of statistics Mr. Chairman referred to us. And we are all glad that we are part of this celebration. What exactly are we celebrating? We are celebrating the completion of 135 years since the transformation of the Calcutta Marine Establishment into the Port Trust. And the celebration is really of what was essentially the Port of Calcutta. The Port of Haldia, which comes under the umbrella of the Calcutta Port Trust, is effectively a creature whose lifespan does not really go back beyond, I would say, the early 1990s. Therefore, essentially, the celebration is on account of the Calcutta Port Trust. And a sort of innovation that the port authorities have introduced since last year. They have chosen to arrange twin lectures on the occasion of the anniversary day. Last year, two of my very good friends, Dr. Sankar Sen and Dr. Satyesh Chakravarti, had been here, and I have read the text of what they said, full of very wise words, from which not just those who are connected with the Calcutta Port Trust will benefit, also some of us outsiders and laymen. This year, I'm afraid, in the choice of the two lectures, there is a mismatch. Professor Barunde is my definition of scholar extraordinary. He has done pioneering work involving India's colonial and post-colonial history. In recent years, he has spread his interests to the problems of growth and development of Central Asian countries. But his academic credentials are really not the substantive virtues by which one would describe Barunde. He is around as a walking encyclopedia. Whenever we have any problems in any area of speculation, we telephone Barunde and we have the answer. Because the depth of his scholarship is so immense that we know that he will never fail us. In contrast, I am only an imposter. I eavesdrop into what scholars like Barunde discuss amongst themselves and try to pick nuggets from here and there and try to re-express them in my own language. I don't succeed very much. Therefore, I would plead with you that kindly bear with me for the next 30 minutes or thereabout, and then dismiss from your mind whatever I might have said and listen with close attention to Professor Barunde. Let me come back to the issue of Calcutta Port. Now, it is in a way a sui generis. It is a river port, but it's a rather unusual kind of river port. It hardly handles any riverine traffic. It's a river port, but it handles almost exclusively seaborne traffic. Now, this was an anomaly, and this anomaly was established by the East India Company. They came out as traders and they picked Calcutta as the point of entry into the eastern parts of India. Now, whether they did so because of the happenstance of the Fort William is something we can always speculate on. Was the Fort William set up while it was set up to protect the Calcutta port and its interests? Or was the Calcutta port chosen to be cited where it has been cited because the Fort William was there? I don't know. You see, this is a question which I will pose to Professor Barunde, let him answer. But all I know is that it was a very unusual location, which perhaps was made possible by the state of navigability of the Hooghly River 300 years ago. Certainly, the East India Company came up to Calcutta. The Dutch and the Danes went further up to Serampur. So certainly the Ganges or the Hooghly, whatever name you describe the river, was very much more navigable than it is today. Apart from that, we cannot, of course, neglect the fact that the boats those days were relatively small size, non-mechanized. So the problems that confront us today were simply not there during that period. But 3 centuries have elapsed. And forget about the history of the last 5 years. In any case, I cannot split the record of Calcutta port as such from the record of the Haldia port over the last 5 years. So I would say that there are some problems of being an inland port which have increasingly made themselves more and more manifest over the decades and over the 3 centuries. What are the problems? One problem is that the Ganges has long ceased to be a navigable river. Maybe till about 100 years ago, there was still some limited riverine traffic, say in the upper reaches of the Ganges, in Uttar Pradesh or in Bihar. Location may be from one port to another port, from Allahabad to Banaras, or from Allahabad to further up. Some, or maybe downstream from Calcutta, say 30 or 40 miles further up, somewhere near the slope of the Raj Mahal. But by and large, the Ganges as a river did not ever attain the kind of navigational achievement which is the record of, let us say, Yangtze or Amazon. Yangtze carries, I don't know, I have been told that something like 30 to 35% of the total merchandise in the whole of China. If you add up the air traffic, the rail traffic, the road traffic, and the river traffic, that some 30 to 35% would be carried along the Yangtze. Or you take Amazon. I remember I had happened to be some 20 odd years ago upstream the Amazon, and we are all the way 2,500 miles, almost near the border of Peru and Ecuador. And that was that magnificent river port, Manaus. With a population of something like 500,000 and hectic activity, I was very pleasantly surprised to discover, as I sauntered around the riverfront, a Sindhi textile shop. They're bearing the proud flag of India way 2,500 miles up the Amazon. And the traffic from there all the way down to the mouth of Rio de Janeiro. Now you find that this is a vibrant riverine traffic which never was the good fortune of Calcutta port. Meanwhile, problems have piled up. Now I can list several problems. Number one, this research started already before independence, say from the second or third decades of the 20th century. Irrigation activities started apace in Uttar Pradesh, which includes what we call Uttaranchal these days, and Bihar. So from the Ganges, you draw water for irrigation purposes. There are all the tributaries of the Ganges. From the tributaries, you draw water so that the total load of water, which in the past used to flow along the Ganges, started getting reduced over time. There was an intensification of the process with the initiation of the 5-year plans in the early 1950s. Much greater allocation under plan heads for irrigation, and Bihar, UP, more and more. You draw water, you draw water, you draw water. The water that finally comes down all the way to the river, to the mouth of the mouth of the Bay of Bengal, that the Bengal Delta just gets it. The inevitable consequence, the rising siltation, goes up and up and up. Siltation. There are two additional reasons for siltation. Number one, population increases. All over North India, along the Indo-Gangetic Valley, population goes up. And the waste that is dumped by households, this waste find their way into the Ganges, all the way from Hardwar. This process is further aggravated by the natural process of urbanization. If India, North India was just village, just a composition of villages after villages after villages, then perhaps the river pollution would have been proportionately less. But villages turn into towns, towns turn into cities, cities turn into megapolises, metropolises, and then the waste, the accumulated waste, finally gets its outlet, receives its outlet into, you see, in the Ganges, which comes down. Now, this is a problem of which Calcutta port has been the victim, but this is not the only one. Dredge, yes, every now and then the port authorities beg for, please give us another dredger. The government of West Bengal's services are enlisted. Please, the government of West Bengal should lobby with the government of India some more dredgers. But dredgers do not help beyond a point. Some shallow removal of waste, but the shallowness of the river channel goes on increasing year after year. Now, this is the ultimate fate from which I don't believe some of the optimistic estimates which we have been recounted to us of recent years can quite compensate for. These realities will be there with us because it's the realities of geopolitical development in the country. That every state will develop, there will be demand for expansion of agriculture, there will be an aroused consciousness of the people in the countryside, they will demand irrigation water and they will draw water from the Ganges and its tributaries. And therefore the victim ultimately will have to be the port of Calcutta. But there are other problems. Now take the case of Farrakhan. We are committed to offer 40,000 cubic of water every year, around the year, to Bangladesh. And this commitment is an international commitment. We cannot easily get away from this commitment. Now that could have been partial relief if, for example, the river Brahmaputra could have been trained and harnessed for Assam, for Bangladesh, and for West Bengal. But this cannot be done for obvious political reasons. Brahmaputra is a river which belongs to China, to Bangladesh, and to India. And unless there is a kind of political rapprochement simultaneously within the three countries, then obviously the kind of Indus Water Treaty which could be entered into under the auspices of the World Bank between India and Pakistan with the Indus Water, that kind of thing cannot be repeated with the Brahmaputra River. Had such a reality taken place that the Brahmaputra was harnessed so that the flooding of Assam came to a seas and there was more controlled water available for Bangladesh, then the strain on Farakka for Ganges water, for Hooghly water would have subsided. But this is yet to be, and for the present, we can only pray that something will happen, that the Ganges, the flow along the Ganges will not shrink. The demand of the Bangladesh authorities will not get aggravated, and that somehow or other we would be able to come to an agreement over Brahmaputra. Now these are all three separate dreams, and if we can combine these three dreams together, perhaps we can say that, all right, perhaps Calcutta Port, Calcutta Ports, apart from the story of, let us say, Haldia or the story of Diamond Harbour, would have a positive ending or maybe positive non-ending, but we can only speculate. But then I know Dr. Chandra will come back at me. No, look at the record. There has been symptoms of an industrial revival along the eastern belt of the country, and we are the beneficiaries, and there are indications that the rate of growth in northeastern India will accelerate very sharply over the next 10, 15, 20 years. Therefore, you can bury your pessimism, we'll go forward. Whether Dr. Chandra continues as chairman or no, I think he has the belief firmly implanted in his heart that Calcutta Port is forever. Perhaps he's right. But I would still ask a question that yes, perhaps Eastern India will grow. There will be very rapid increase in domestic output in these parts of the country. The next question immediately crops up. What kind of growth? What will be the pattern of growth? I can buy that there will be a very significant increase in the size of output year after year. But what type of output? Now, to answer this question, even to my own satisfaction, I would like to go back, say, 150 years. You see, there's a lot of talk these days about outsourcing activities. There was a very special kind of outsourcing of activities economic activities, of which Eastern India and Calcutta port, in which Eastern India and Calcutta port played a very significant part and role. In the 18th and 19th centuries, the United States was set up for economic development through the opening up of southern agriculture. Tobacco, sugar, cotton, corn. This was done by importing labor from Africa, slave labor, who went in. This was an outside source. Labor was an outside source. This labor was imported into America and put to work in American agriculture. And so migration, there was physical migration of African slaves into the United States, and the result was the boom in American agriculture, on the basis of which the rest of the development in the United States in the 19th and early 20th centuries took place. And analogous development took place in the Mauritius in the first place and the West Indies, the Caribbean area. Labor is imported from Eastern India, Bihar and Uttar Pradesh, immigrant agriculture labor. They were pushed out of Calcutta port, indented labor, sent away to Mauritius and to the West Indies for the sugar plantations and for the exploration of the bauxite mines. Again, outsourcing. The labor was the outside source that was migrated. This labor migrated into Mauritius and the West Indies, and this was the key. This outsourced labor was the key to the transformation of the economies of West Indies and Mauritius. A different kind of outsourcing is taking place now. The historical role of Calcutta port is over. Outsourcing from the United States, from several countries in Europe to India, a little bit in China, a little bit some of the Eastern European countries. Information technology and software related economic activities. It costs, say, maybe $200 a year, an hour, to engage a sophisticated labor unit in the United States of America. Now, that kind of labor hour can be performed in India if you spend only $10, so at 5% of the total cost. So this is the major transformation in the world economic system that has taken place over the course of the past 10 decades. I was looking at the statistics of foreign trade of our own country. In 2004-05, the last fiscal year for which data are available, our merchandise imports were of the order of $79 billion. But our earnings from tourism, banking and insurance, software exports, and business outsourcing was as much as $51 billion. The previous year, it was only $24 billion. It became $51 billion in the course of a single year, more than doubled. And for all I know, in the year 2005, 2006, this might be even double further, something like $100 billion, which means the earnings from transactions which are of the non-merchandise type will yield us foreign exchange much more than what we get from merchandise exports through the ports, including the port of Calcutta. This is the transformation in our foreign trade, foreign transactions that are taking place. And what will happen? That merchandise trade will no longer have the kind of importance that it had in the past if this trend of outsourcing and software export expansion continues. Again, let us be realistic. You see, what we earn from tourist earnings is almost 99.5% would be on account of air traffic. You see, the big liners, the big passenger liners have stopped crisscrossing across the ocean. There are some luxury liners, but very rarely they touch the Indian shores. Therefore, whatever increase in takes place in traffic, in tourist traffic, would be on account of aerial movement. So the ports will have no part of it. Software, electronic commerce, business process outsourcing, electronic commerce, banking and insurance, again mostly electronic activity. So what will happen? The government, even the government, will lose interest in ports. The ports will not have the same kind of importance in India's life and living that it had in the past. This will be so also for another reason. The planes are getting bigger and bigger. And even machinery and equipment are getting lighter and lighter. So it might come, as time might soon come. But even heavy capital goods, relatively heavy capital goods, might be addicted rather than travel by boat. On the other hand, there is another kind of rather worrisome development within the arena of shipping itself. Even the ships are getting bigger, heavier tonnage, and I'm told that a time will come. You see, already the passenger liners had stopped coming. Even 50 years ago, I remember 55 years ago, Dr. Sen, who lectured to you last year, and myself, we traveled to Europe by the same boat. I still remember the name of the boat, Tranto, belonging to the Orient Line. We took the boat from Colombo. Even that early, no passenger boats will come up to Calcutta. Why, forget about it. Rabindranath Tagore, when he first traveled to Europe in the late 1970s, he had to go down to Madras to catch a passenger liner. So far as passenger traffic is concerned, Calcutta's record has always been, but perhaps Calcutta's record will not be that unique anymore. Even Bombay and Kochi and Vizag and Colombo perhaps would join the rank of Calcutta. And I'm told that perhaps the huge big ships, they will anchor only at Singapore and they will disperse their traffic, the merchandise, and load the merchandise right at Singapore, and there will be feeder boats which will travel from Bombay, from Kochi, from Colombo, from Mitra, from Chennai, and from Vizag and from Calcutta. I don't know how the economics of merchandise will work out with this kind of arrangement for the Indian subcontinent. So these are the things that I think we should worry about, and I wish from now on the Calcutta Port authorities would maintain separate records of achievements via Haldia and via Calcutta per se. Maybe they will have soon under their umbrella also a budding new port at Diamond Harbour. But perhaps the story of Diamond Harbour and Haldia would be somewhat different from the story of Calcutta as such. Shall I conclude on such a negative note? I thought long and hard. There must be some redeeming quality in belonging to the Port of Calcutta. And suddenly I thought of doing it. We should pray for more rapid global warming. If there is accelerated global warming, maybe Singapore will go down, maybe Mumbai will go down, maybe Chennai will go down, but maybe Haldia would go down. Thank you very much.